Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Blind Spot. Today, my guest is Antonio Bovoso. Antonio is somebody I've worked with before, previously at Deloitte, which feels like a really long time ago. And I'm going to give Antonio some time to introduce himself and to talk about this book that he wrote, which I'm extremely happy to have read, and the timing is perfect. So I'll give you a moment to introduce yourself, Antonio, and talk about your book.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here with you today. So Antonio Bovoso, I am a cyber executive by trade. Been in the industry roughly 25, 26 years or so before we actually called it cyber. Came all the way through the ranks through desktop support. About 15 years in consulting, where we spent some of our time together at Deloitte. In the last 5 years, I was running cybersecurity for biotech, really just building a program up from the ground up into building a full-fledged team. Since then, I started Consiro Advisory, which is a cybersecurity consulting firm doing advisory work in the biotech space, as well as advising cybersecurity startups. And somehow I became an author over the last year, was never on the docket, but spent some time writing topics on cybersecurity and the boardroom and the path I took, and really wrote it to kind of give other CISOs a leg up and help them kind of understand that better.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely have some favorite chapters, and you know as well as I do the last couple years really talking about AI and whatnot. So I'm sure we're going to get into that at some point in the future. But
Oh,
the book is a great
absolutely.
read,
Yeah.
and if you
Yeah.
want to pick it up, I definitely suggest you do so. Um, all right, so let's talk about this episode. So the topic of today is going to be around the translation gap, and this is where boards and CISOs or CIOs who are responsible for risk management or IT decisions that touch risk. Why do they talk past each other, and what can be done to bring that conversation in line between boards and executives who are responsible for security, all the way down to the people who have the tactical understanding of cybersecurity versus the ones that have strategic, or the people that are just focused on compliance. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think a big part of the problem is there's no common language.
Hmm.
Those are things you and I have talked about in the past. And, the language can also change from company to company.
Hmm.
But if you look at the other divisions and teams that are going up to talk to the board, finance and the board speak the same language, right? They have a deck, they build it out, and everybody is on the same page. I've seen the same thing with sales. I've seen the same thing with marketing, as well
Hmm.
as on the science and tech sides. So, you know, when the CISO builds out his presentation, is building out the things that we know how to do. We have KPIs, we have metrics, we have critical things that run the organization,
Hmm.
and we're delivering that message to teams or boards that their job is to govern. They're not operational and tactical and day to day, and they're getting a day to day message. So we're often just on two different planes.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, that's something I've seen quite a bit. And as a CISO myself, my particular specialty has always been on the tactical side, right? When we worked
Sure.
together at Deloitte, that was my focus on the infrastructure side. And it took me a long time to really learn how to translate that very tactical understanding like up to the board level. It took a very long time. Do you have any guidance for others, right? I have my way, and I'm gonna talk about that in a second, but do you have any guidance for maybe CISOs who are struggling communicating up level, when they're more tactical? And then the inverse is, what about CISOs who are more risk oriented and don't know how to speak the tactical language in a world that's driven, right, by, largely right now, technical, advances? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so, I was, more on the risk side, have been throughout the years, technical long ago, but far from that. And, I think my message always revolved around cyber risk and how different it was from everything else. And that couldn't have been further away from where I needed to be. And I began to learn that organizations look at risk, and cyber risk is no different.
Mhm.
So a lot of times when I began to say, hey, this risk is important, there's all these disastrous things that could happen. One, it was a little bit of a scare tactic. Two, that same room had seven other messages just like that, right? From the
Mhm.
various teams. So how was I different? Right. So
Yeah.
how I made that work more was learning and aligning with the various business units. So I kind of considered myself as something that was on the side of the business and operating to protect them. How I got my message across was integrating myself with them,
Mhm.
looking at sales and their pipeline and what their projects were, and helping understand how my projects aligned and how risk could, managing risk could support them. Um, any way your company drives money in regulatory aspects,
Mhm.
tying cyber to those and showing value in those projects and delivering a combined message, were ways that I found suddenly resonated with executives, the board, or anybody listening when I was no longer just, hey, I'm a cost center. I was
Yeah.
more about, hey, I am actually tied to the success of this project that's going to bring in revenue for our organization. So
Okay.
those were the big pieces that really kind of started to change my message and have people listen.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, it really sounds like, and I agree with this because this is how I had to adjust, was
Sure.
being able to work with the other business units, understand what was driving them to either produce revenue or whatever it was for the company, and align that risk conversation there before you go up level. Am I understanding that right?
You're understanding it correctly, and one thing that I think is very important for our role is, as the CISO or anyone in cyber, we often say, hey, they don't understand what we do. Right?
Mhm.
They don't understand the complexities. They don't understand the challenges. How much do we understand about what they do? Right? Is my
Mhm.
piece of like, do we understand the business? Do we understand how it operates, and how they generate revenue? And I think that can work both ways. Building that relationships in both directions just makes a better organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And when I stopped saying the word firewall in board conversations, I got much further. So,
Yeah, any acronym has to go, right?
yeah.
Any tech stack piece has to go. They don't mean anything up there. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you feel like technically capable CISOs get sidelined from decisions because they're so tactical? Like how what do you think about that?
They can, right? And the challenge of this whole thing is that no two organizations are the same, no two boards are the same, no two executive teams are the same. So
Mhm.
you have to be somewhat adaptable. And I think the technical CISO gets sidelined because, one, people don't know how to translate the information they have. So even if, the CEO gets it, well, how are they going to relay that information into something critical that goes up above? And,
Mhm.
a sidelining, from what I've seen, well, let me tell you how I got sidelined, right? Coming in with that type of message. Let's just be real
Yeah.
here, right? So, how I got sidelined was I had, my original board messages were all these projects, all these KPIs, blocked 100,000 attacks, and all these what I call vanity metrics in the book. I'm not sure if you're there yet,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
These vanity metrics of like, here's the millions of things we did, and here's why your tools are now worth, all the money that you paid for them, right? Um, they were like, great, that's important. Um, I know we said 10 slides, but how about 3 slides, right? And they're like, you can't have all this stuff. So they knocked my slides down, right? Now I got this
Mhm.
mini message, right? And by the time I got up there, they pushed me to the back, of the presentation, right?
Mhm.
And then when I got in there, they said, "Hey, you know what? It's been a long day. You guys have been here a long time. Can you make this fast? Can you get us through here?" So,
Mhm.
there was some good because they weren't exactly worried about me, right? They would look like Antonio has it under control. But also, one, I wasted a lot of time. It took me forever to get those 10 slides, right? But more importantly, I didn't have any way to show them value. I didn't give them anything to cover, right?
Mhm.
I just gave them facts.
Mhm.
So in that regard, I kind of sidelined myself. I just didn't know any better.
Yeah. No, I actually love that statement you just made, where you gave them facts and not
Yeah.
necessarily the things they needed, for governance. Dig into that
Mhm.
a little more because that little statement is how, 20 I went from 2013 to 2015 talking about firewalls at a board meeting, which you already know how that went, to really translating to the business. And I think that statement you just made nailed that. Yeah, dig into that a little more.
Yeah, yeah. So the numbers and these types of things, great, right? But they are looking at the news, right? They are
Hmm.
understanding that companies are getting regulatory fines. They are understanding that companies are getting breached and all these types of things, and that has nothing to do with cyber tooling, right? What they need to understand is what the outcomes of that are, what the risk they have is, right? Their responsibility to govern it, right? And how they can help you, right? So that's the key part of saying, you know what, we have this level of posture. We need to get to this level, right? We
Hmm.
need your support and governance to help us get there. It should be more of a symbiotic relationship. So that's the piece that, when I fed them information, it has to be something they can absorb and deliver back the guidance and governance I need to build my program out.
Yeah. Okay. Um, here's a good question. Do
Yeah.
you have a recommended number of slides you bring into a board meeting? You mentioned 3 earlier, but was that forced or is that your optimal now?
I don't want more than 3 slides to anything. So
Mhm.
I am moving further and further away from slides as time goes on. They
Yep.
they serve their purpose. I like to, you're going to send up the pre-read, right? And
Mhm.
for anyone who hasn't done a board presentation, um, they get everything ahead of time, all the materials, so they can read it before they come in, and they get a stack like this big, right?
Yep.
So the one thing they don't appreciate is when guys like me put a million slides in because I thought that was helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what I do now is I have my slides that will never be more than five. I would love to do three, but my first slide is always a slide that if I only have 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it is, my whole message is on that one slide,
Mhm.
right? And I can speak to it. And I work now to just deliver it via that one slide and not move through it.
Okay.
That it is more, those are talking points, and I'm giving a message. Because I know as soon as I put new slides up, people stop listening to me and start reading.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I like the 3 to 5, no more than 5 rule.
Yeah, max.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you see, I'm gonna sidetrack for a second. With the
All
3 to
right.
5, where do you
Mhm.
see AI playing into board reporting on the cyber risk level?
Yeah. So this is quite fascinating.
Mhm.
Because some of the last conversations I had at my last company, it got hijacked by AI, right? So I had a message of, well, here's the journey I've taken you on. Here's our posture, compared to the standards. Here's the things we said we would do, and here's next. I always have, a talk about the risks in the industry, those types of things. Well, that
Yeah.
was naturally AI because I knew they watched the news and wanted to hear about it. Well, I barely got off on another topic, right?
Mhm.
So I think in that regard, I should have planned much better to say, here's AI risk, here's how we're managing it, here's what applies to us, here's what doesn't, right? And that came.
Mhm.
So I think you have to really take it a step back from here's the greater, broader AI risk in the whole story. It's here's how the organization has adopted AI. Here's how we're partnered with, IT, the CTO. And here's, the combined effort to manage risk within this area. And this is what I feel the risk is. I
Yeah.
think if you take that route, you'll be far more successful.
Yeah, and really, what you're talking about is a term that's been around for forever, but now broken off into all of the things that come up. It doesn't matter what the vector is, it doesn't matter what the tech is, and that's GRC, right? Like to me,
Sure. Yeah.
it's breaking all of that down. So, in
Yep.
your own words, what does GRC mean to you, right? And how does that translate up level to the board? I want to keep the communication there, right? So how do you explain GRC to the board and make them see value in projects you're proposing or anything like that?
Yeah, so, really like to simplify GRC, right? And governance risk and compliance can govern any risks that comes up from within cybersecurity or even in tech. So when I talk to them about it, I really want them to understand one, what our governance program looks like, right? What the
Hmm.
regulations apply to us, how we're managing risk, what compliance we need to adhere to, right? To me, that should be something that they know on an ongoing basis and not
Yep.
something that I just come up there with and they're saying, hey, what's the compliance that applies here? Right.
Hmm.
So as I come up with my updates, as we integrate AI or any new technology or different models that are coming out, um, I can say, hey, here's how this applies to our already established GRC program. This is how we're fitting the risk into that, or here is the compliance standard. And this is now we've updated our policies, so we now align in this direction. Um, and I don't really want them to think of it as something they have to govern in great detail. I want them to understand that we are managing it, that
Hmm.
if there is risk there, I will tell them, but it fits under the broader umbrella of GRC.
Yeah.
And that is not now this sort of hot new toy that has to have its own thing, right? It fits within our program.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then in terms of talking to a board about let's shift over to risk as the current topic. So
Yeah.
in terms of presenting risk itself, what
Mhm.
what have you found most successful in translating risk to the board, and what have you found least successful? So I kind of want to see both sides of that, right?
Sure, sure. Let's start with least, right? So that's the easy one, right? So done very poorly in translating it from a cybersecurity standpoint. If we look at it from the angle of here's all the things that could go wrong, right?
Hmm.
Or risk as for lack of a better term, doom and gloom, right?
Yeah.
Company can be shut down, all these scare taxes of things that could happen. And I think that was the cyber message for kind of a long time, right?
The FUD,
Um,
right? We That's how we got our
yeah,
money.
that's how we got our money, right? If you don't give this, ransomware is coming in. We're shutting everything
Hmm.
down. I need 150K by Thursday, right? Like,
Hmm.
so I think, that the further up you go, that resonates less and less,
Yeah.
and also because, the board doesn't tend to make those types of decisions. They don't commonly say, yes, you can buy that, right? There are some cases where it goes that route. Um, what translating has worked for me that I look at is from the enablement side, right? So I am translating to say by managing this risk, we are enabling, X. So when we looked at bringing in, AI or some other types of things around sales enablement that enabled them to make better decisions, right? Instead of saying, hey, if we don't have this tool, everything's going to go wrong, right? Translation to me is, well, with agentic governance and tooling around it, we can now enable the sales team to use these tools to make better decisions and to
Mhm.
drive revenue further and use their time in a better way. So that's
Yeah.
how I would translate it. Take all the tech out, take all the risk from a bad way out, and turn it into something that is enablement.
Okay. And you said that a few times, so I'm sensing the theme there, and, I saw that quite a few times in the book, so,
It's my
um,
favorite word. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
I see, I see. Hey, there's there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
And I certainly agree with you, right?
Yeah.
I would say as a younger practitioner, right?
All right. All right. You're still pretty young, but that's okay. Yeah.
Hey, listen, it's funny. I think we were talking about this a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I just think about where we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and everything that changes, and it can change overnight these days, right? But everything that changes, it still comes back to this translation and definition, right? And in my own
Mhm.
career, the thing I had to learn the most, was speaking the language of business, right? So my
Sure.
alma mater, I went to Michigan State University for my MBA, and um, I'm one of those people that went for my MBA after my technical career, and the
Sure.
reason why I did that was I found I was struggling trying to translate like very technical things to the board. And I kept trying to do fancier slides, better pie charts, uh, all of that. And it wasn't until I started speaking the language of the business and following your words, the enablement
Sure.
of business units or divisions, whatever it was, that's when I found success. And I found, 5 to 6 years ago, my career completely switched from very technical, and I'm always gonna stay technical, it's just like a personal passion, but,
Yeah.
um, I found the ability to speak at the business level up and down or cross-functional, is really what helped me become a better CISO, and I think that's reflected in your book and part of the conversation that we've had today. Um
Yeah. I think so. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, no,
Yeah.
no, no, you're good. No,
Yeah.
because and I guess the question out of that would be,
Mhm.
outside of, most people these days aren't gonna go get a $100,000 degree off of things you can likely just learn on YouTube.
Yeah. I hope they're not.
What
So, yeah.
Yeah, what advice would you give someone, if they were in that same struggle on how to communicate up, right? And
Yep.
how to gain the confidence and ability to speak in terms the business understands to be more respected and heard at the board level?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Because that is about relationship building. It is not exactly about, hey, what are the terms? How do I know them? Right? What list do I go find?
Mhm.
Um, it's not about that. So, one of the things you can do at any level in an organization, is networking. A lot of people think networking is something that happens at night and there's champagne and all these other things, right?
Yep.
This is about learning and knowing who your counterparts, customers, whatever you want to call them with the company are.
Mhm.
But I have made at least an hour or two a week set aside to meet with different leaders within the company.
Yep.
And it's amazing how willing to give people are if you talk to them and just say, "Hey, I'd love 30 minutes with you. I'm trying to understand your strategic initiatives. I'm trying to understand how we can support you better, see where we align." Like people will give you time and explain all sorts of things to you. If
Oh,
you
yeah.
go into a meeting and you start calling somebody out, well, guess what? You're not getting anywhere with that. So I took it upon myself just to say, I have to know every VP in the company. I have to know every leader at this level and what they're trying to accomplish. And
Mhm.
usually what happened is they would sit me down and they would sit me down with their roadmap strategy deck or whatever it was. And I literally pulled language from their slides, and began to use that language myself, in things that I was saying back to them and others, and it changed everything once I started doing that. But, you
Okay.
know, I can't, if I go back into another CISO role, right? I like consulting. We'll see what happens, right? Um, I will have to do that again. It doesn't mean, hey, I wrote a book and I spent all this time and I know it. I need to know
Mhm.
it at X company with X people, with X leaders, in order to be successful.
Yeah. Okay. No, I like that. Um, so I guess let me ask. Actually, let me go the other direction then. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
What happens when right? Because a board wants business impact. They don't want the technical detail. We've established that.
Absolutely. Yep.
But what happens when you translate too far and you lose
Mhm.
like the truth of the risk and you get lost? Where's the line between translation and oversimplification when you're communicating risk?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's going to move depending upon who's in the room, right?
Mhm.
And the harder part there is when you have multiple people in the room with different levels of understanding. And this is where I don't ever build that message in a silo.
Mhm.
And I think that's how I kind of keep my baseline, is, with other leaders in the organization, up to, CFO level, if they'll listen to me, to really say, hey, here's the risk. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're delivering this at the board level. Does it have the impact we need?
Yeah.
And I think your partners can help you there. The other thing is, your team can help you there, right? To say, hey, you know what, head of vulnerability management, whatever it is, here's what you've told me the risk is. Here's what I understand. Here's how we're relaying it at the governance level, at the board level. Have I lost your message? Am I still capturing the risk? Right.
Yeah.
Um, and there maybe, there's probably people who have it better than that, right? And just, snap a finger and they can translate. To
Yeah.
me, it's always a work in progress, right?
Yeah.
And I can usually also tell by the blank stares, right? So
Yeah.
whether I took it too far and I made it too
Yeah.
dumb or it's too
Yeah.
tech, like if it's blank this way or blank that way, I know I missed, right?
I
If
was gonna
there's
get into the body language.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
so if I've lost you, I know I did too much or too little, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, in the theme, and your book saying like the art of translating, cyber risk, body language. I cannot stress like if you're in person, it is 90% of the message, right? You can put your content on the screen, a slide, or whatever,
Sure.
but especially in person, or even communicating with each other, over Zoom or
Mhm.
video, if
Yeah.
you can't read the room, you're gonna lose before you get to that third slide, right? If you're
You
saying
got it.
something
Yeah.
and all you're seeing is deer in headlights or people picking up their phone, oh my gosh, you better pivot quick, right?
You got it.
Have you
Got it.
seen that like in a boardroom, or how do you adjust for that?
Well, I caused that. Not only have I seen it, I was the reason for it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And honestly, this is why I wrote the book, right? Literally, the reason I wrote it, I wrote
mhm,
what I wish I had in the beginning because there was
mhm,
nothing. And when I went to do my first board meeting, it was coming up. I scoured the internet. I scoured everything. I was trying to buy things. I would have paid for a PDF article if something was out there, right?
yeah,
And there really wasn't much other than some very high level details. Um, and I knew that I wanted to make the best board presentation ever.
yeah,
You and I were at Deloitte, so we're like, nobody makes better slides than us, right? And
yeah,
and I created something that was, museum quality deck that nobody wanted to read, right?
mhm,
So when I went in there, I gave a message that didn't align with anything else they heard that day. Didn't make sense to their level of education on cyber.
mhm,
And it was the first time they had ever heard from me. So between all of that, I got, you know, two people on their phone somebody else clearly thinking about a vacation or something like that, and you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
one woman actually listening, and I have no idea if she got it or not, right? And
Yep.
that's where that wound up.
Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious. I actually
Yeah.
had a what's today? Wednesday? I'm like losing track of the days.
It's all right.
Um,
I just keep
I had
showing
a
up.
conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, I had a conversation this week with somebody, and just somebody I mentor, and I won't mention her name because I'm sure she's gonna watch this episode.
All right. No
Um,
names. No names.
but
Yep.
she gave
Yeah.
me a new deck that was generated by Claude Design, and it was beautiful, better than anything I think I could have put together, at Deloitte.
Yeah.
All the
Mhm.
fancy stuff, and she was so proud of it. And I got to I think like the third or fourth slide, and I'd already given her the feedback was too long. That was my whole response, but
Yep. Yep.
um, I'm looking at this beautiful thing, and I'm like, you've lost the story you're trying to tell, right?
Sure.
Because you focus so much on how it looks. Um, are you seeing that in the industry right now? Because like AI is making the design of things like a different thing, or what are you seeing the impact of AI is on the presentation of risk to the board?
Yeah. The presentations are ridiculous now, right?
Mhm,
They are clearly AI generated. They are getting, more generic, more of
mhm,
the words lost in what the original message was.
yep,
If you are going to the board, I will pay you, whoever is watching this, to not use AI for your presentation, right?
yeah,
Um, One of the things that I would love for anyone to do, and I did this by accident, and it really helped me a lot, is I got finance's deck of what they show the board.
mhm,
And it's black and white, right? Literally,
yep,
there's not a color on that thing to save your life. And the funny thing is, when I first saw their deck, I was kind of like, well, look at these guys. I got these beautiful slides. They didn't even spend
yeah,
any time on the, you know what I mean? I was like, these
yeah,
poor guys, I should help them out, right?
yep,
Um, and their deck was 100% value. Who cared about the colors, right? It was
yep,
all the exact message that was needed for them to govern.
mhm,
My deck was about, I can make the best deck I can make, right? What I
yep.
really did was I made a deck for me to feel good about presenting. It had
Oh, you
nothing to
nailed
do
it.
with them. Yep.
I'm so happy you said that because
Yeah.
the feeling that I had when I had this beautiful thing in front of me, it was my own accomplishment,
Yeah.
but nothing was more deflating than going into a meeting with my beautiful thing and just being straight up ignored because it
Yeah. Yeah.
it didn't translate to them. And the
Yeah.
second part of my example earlier from my mentee that I talked about with her deck is I said the same thing. I said, "Look, one, I'm gonna look over the fact that you likely fed a public AI risk information about a business. I'm gonna move past that.
That's a whole nother
I'm gonna move past that
podcast.
one for a
Yeah.
sec because there's a whole episode coming about that.
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
said, look, I would rather have a title, a page number, and things that the board needs to make a decision, right? And that is how I started changing my career. And what I'm telling the people that I mentor is
Sure.
these people are very busy, right? You might see them if you do board meetings once a month, I'd be shocked. But let's say you do quarterly. Think about that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
might see these people 4 times a year. Do you think
Max.
they want to
Yeah.
read a book?
Yeah.
No. They want to know a fact, an outcome, the risk of either decision A, B, or C, and what you recommend.
Yeah.
That's what worked for me. So that's what I
Yeah.
told her. I can't wait
Mhm.
to see her update. Hopefully I get to see that tomorrow. But
I'd like to
um
take a look as well. So,
yeah, yeah, I went off on a little tangent because
yeah.
yeah, I don't know, just the whole focus on design and stuff and then AI and then all of that. So that's gonna be a whole other conversation. So
Yeah, that's it. And that is, you know, definitely going to get worse before it gets better. But, I think on that theme of the presentation and the presentation for me versus them, the next step for me was aligning the message, right?
mhm,
Even though I fixed it, it was still my message. It wasn't
yep,
an organizational message, right? There
yeah,
were people going up that day with significant risks far bigger than mine. How am I working with that? Is my
Yeah.
message aligned there somehow? What can I do when I go in there to tie some of these things together? And that's kind of the networking leadership
Yep.
thing I was talking about is the more we can get a solidified message across executives,
Mhm.
the easier we make it for the board to do their job.
Yeah. No, I love your thoughts on the networking aspect, getting to know the
Mhm,
other business leaders, getting to know how they communicate what they need up to the board because
mhm.
most of them are revenue drivers, right? So 9
Yep.
times out of 10,
Mhm.
that's what a company's gonna care about, right? Is
Yep.
the revenue drivers, and clearly those people are successful at it. So I love the idea of going to other business units, finding out how they communicate and replicating that versus trying to cram what you think goes up, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
And
do like that.
yeah, and it's worth if they can show you, ask them for their slides. What do you show
Yeah,
the board? What does it look
yeah,
like? Right?
yeah. So one more thing I wanted to ask here is where do you see liability landing in cyber? Is that with the cyber leader, whoever's in charge of that? Is that with the board? I know there's some regulatory things that put that
Mhm.
in certain places, but um, and there's a second question to that, so it's kind of a setup. My bad, but
Yeah, I was waiting for this. I figured it was coming.
yeah. So, so when you talk about liability, right? Who
Yep.
owns it, and how do you communicate it?
Well, you're asking a borderline unanswerable question because everybody I've talked to, every general counsel I've talked to has told me something different, right?
Hmm.
Um, so here's the deal, right? You mentioned the regulations, and I'm guessing you're talking about the SEC regulations
Yep.
that some of the personal liability on board members. They
And
have,
the upcoming healthcare ones. Yep.
and well, that's a whole nother
Yep.
podcast, right? So,
Yep.
so those haven't been actioned yet, but they will, right? They will
Hmm.
make an example of somebody, and that will drive further changes. So, there is liability on that level, but that's at a governance level of governing the program, right?
Hmm.
Um, and those people are covered through E&O insurance, errors and
Yep.
omissions, right? So the company covers them. The riskier part is for the CISO themselves, that in the past has been named personally,
Hmm.
in federal suits. So whether or not you want to say you own it or don't own it, or your organization believes you own it or not,
Hmm.
those people seem to be on the hook for being for negligence. So I think, in answer to your question, it's owned at multiple layers, is how I
Hmm.
see it. Yeah.
Yep. Well, you kind of deflated my trick question because that's where I
That
was
was my
heading.
whole
Is
point. Yes.
yeah. So, and what I've seen is there's a huge difference between a scapegoat and the liability owner, right? Which
Well,
is a
yeah.
totally different conversation. And you
Yeah.
touched on it a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but liability is owned across different levels. Now, the biggest thing I've seen from a CISO who gets frustrated because they believe that the board doesn't understand or ignores their recommendation on risk or whatnot, and they
Mhm.
feel like the liability is on them, so they quit, right?
Yep.
Or they get disgruntled or whatever happens.
Mhm.
What's your advice for that CISO or whomever is communicating that to either learn how to communicate the levels of responsibility or accept that you've outlined it enough for people to make a decision? What's your thought process on that, and how does someone handle that?
Yeah. You're never going to get it all right. You're never going to translate it perfectly, right, till they
Yep.
fully understand the risk, because a lot of it is actually complicated, right?
Hmm.
As far as what the details are, how many systems are involved, 2,000 vendors, all these various things,
Hmm.
and you're up there asking for the world, and so is everyone else, right? So you're falling in that pattern somewhere. If you feel your message hasn't landed, right? One, look inside, right? Look at your translation,
Yep.
talk to your partner executives and begin to think, is it me, right? or do they just not get it? Um, Two is um, maybe they don't get it. Maybe you have translated well. But what is their level of education? Right? Are we
Mhm.
just focusing on translating, or is there a focus on educating them and helping them understand?
Yep.
That's a whole other topic I can get into if we wanna go there. The other part is, if you've gone up and given your message, if you've made recommendations for your own liability, it is on record. Those board meetings are documented. The the decks are saved, all these types of things. So you are documented on record of making recommendations, right? So
Right.
that's always a good thing to have. You can also tie it to your GRC program and your risk registers to say, hey, you know what? Here's a risk we decided to accept,
Yep.
and go that route. And you have it documented at your level. It's documented at the higher level. And sometimes you've done the best you can. There is a personal decision if they are just not aligned at all. Maybe it's not the place for you.
Mhm.
But you're never going to go up there and win it all and never leave there somewhat disgruntled in that, hey, here's a risk and I can't close.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's those are great points. Okay. Let me see. I think I had one more. And I wish I would wrote this down, but I'm like racking my
Well,
head. So
all
I
right,
think my
what's
last
that?
one was around like if okay, if you're a CISO and you have a strong program, but
Mhm.
you don't yet have board or executive level credibility, because you and I both know some CISOs are not considered traditional executives of a company. If you
Most of
don't
them.
have that credibility,
Yeah.
what do you change first, right? Do you change, and I think you've answered this before, but I'm gonna let you link
All
these
right.
together.
Yeah.
What do you change to fix that?
Yeah, so I did touch on this a little because it's part of my core thesis of what worked for me, right?
Yep.
I think the key piece is if you look at a cyber executive and you look at other executives in the company, we act quite differently in what we believe we're responsible for, right? And I think you have to look at what the company is in business to do,
Hmm.
and think of that more as your goal, right?
Yeah.
So when I was at the biotech, we made a postpartum depression drug, the first of its kind. It was a wonderful thing. Um, and one of the things I heard somebody say is, yes, my job is X, but I'm really here to make sure women who need it get this medication and live their lives. And I
Hmm.
thought, okay, well, you're in accounting. Like, how does that work? Right. But that was kind of what they brought to their job. And I
Yeah.
thought, okay, let me start to look at what I do that way. Yes, I do cybersecurity, but the larger engine of this company is trying to accomplish, X.
Hmm.
And I am here to do that. And this is how I do it. This is my part. And I began to make that part of my message. I added in sort of the networking piece to learn more about, well, how do we get these meds out the door and these types of things? It actually made me a better cyber practitioner because
Hmm.
I began to look at, you know, from a product standpoint, how the company worked.
Hmm.
Began to wrap my cyber program around a new version of the crown jewels, right?
Hmm.
Based on how we got things out the door. So it sort of naturally tied my message to things that were quite important to the business. So it was beyond more than just networking.
Yep.
So I think if you just find yourselves in the inner working of your company and truly understanding each part of what generates revenue,
Hmm.
that alone will turn you into more of a traditional executive than just a cyber
No, that I couldn't have said that better myself, and I
executive.
appreciate that. So,
Yeah,
all right, so I'm going to wrap up here, but the blind spot. One thing that we do is we end every episode with one question, and you can only give me one answer.
just
Okay,
one. No, I
just
can't
one.
give you like
Yep.
a
Nope.
two-part kind of thing. All right.
Nope. Nope. So there's a reason why we do that. So,
Uh,
so the question is always going to end this way: is what's the one thing you wish the other side of the conversation understood?
Ah, all right. Just one thing, huh?
Just one. Yeah. So, and
All
it's
right.
see how it gets you.
It messes me up because it's got like 7 parts to it.
Yep.
Yes.
You got to pick
Uh,
one.
I wish they understood how much we want to help them.
All right. I
Yep.
want to dig into that. I'm gonna follow my own rule, and that's gonna be it.
I want to
And
explain it too.
yeah,
Yes.
no, and
Yeah.
what we use that for is,
Yeah.
so like another episode, I'm gonna have a counterpart to this episode. So
Mhm,
this episode, we talked about the translation gap, why boards and CISOs talk past each other from a
mhm.
perspective of a CISO.
Sure.
The counterpart to this is going to be having a very experienced board member come in and answer this same sort of episode from their perspective and then tie them two together, right? So the idea around the blind spot is once
Mhm.
we find that blind spot, offering both sides of the coin, because they're going to get asked the same question, right? What do you wish the
Yep.
other side understood? And then that's how we navigate that. So that's
All
the whole
right.
purpose of the podcast.
All right. There may be the same answer. Let's see what happens. Right.
Never know.
One thing is that the third angle to that is you got to bring everybody together.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And that we briefly thought about that, but I don't
Yeah.
want people throwing things at their cameras, you know. So,
All right.
but
One step at a time. One step at
yeah, yeah. But
a
hey,
time.
thanks for joining the blind spot, Antonio. We appreciate having you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Do you have anything you wanna close with?
Can I do a shameless book plug? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's right
the,
here
bo-
for me too.
the boardroom CISO for sale. So no,
Yep.
it's been an absolute pleasure. Congratulations on this podcast and all the successful things you're doing. My claim to fame is I was once your mentor at Deloitte.
Yep.
And now you're an amazing superstar, right? So
I
hats
don't know
off to you
about
and all
that.
the success.
No, hey, I appreciate that, and you know what?
All
I'll see you at Black Hat.
right, sounds good.
All right.